It was just another ordinary day in Washington, D.C., or so Dan Bongino thought as he approached the imposing structure of the FBI headquarters. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the pavement, but something about the air felt different, charged with tension, like a storm brewing far beyond what anyone could see. Dan had come here for answers, answers to questions that had been gnawing at him for weeks now. But before he even reached the entrance, chaos erupted. A wall of security guards, their faces hard and unyielding, blocked his path. Their movements were swift, calculated, leaving no room for argument. One guard stepped forward, his voice firm and cold. "You are not allowed here," he said, his eyes never wavering from Dan's. But Dan wasn't one to back down easily. He stood tall, his heart pounding but his resolve unwavering. "I have every right to be here," Dan replied, his tone steady despite the growing crowd of onlookers gathering around them. "This is public property, and I demand answers." The guards didn't budge. Instead, they tightened their formation, creating an impenetrable barrier between Dan and the building. Whispers spread through the gathered crowd, some supportive, others critical, but all watching intently as the confrontation unfolded. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, without warning, one of the guards pulled out a radio, speaking into it in hushed tones. Moments later, more agents arrived, doubling the size of the blockade. It was clear they weren't letting Dan pass. What did they have to hide? What secrets lurked behind those thick glass walls, and why would they go to such lengths to keep someone like Dan away? As the situation escalated, Dan knew there was only one way forward: uncovering the truth. But little did he know, the truth was far darker and more dangerous than anything he could have imagined. Dan Bongino wasn't just any ordinary man. He was a former police officer, a best-selling author, and a well-known conservative commentator who had spent years exposing corruption and holding powerful institutions accountable. To many, he was a voice of reason in a chaotic world. To others, he was a thorn in their side, a relentless pursuer of truth who refused to back down, no matter the cost. But today, Dan faced a challenge unlike anything he'd encountered before. The FBI building loomed over him, its cold steel and glass facade reflecting the afternoon sun like a mirror. Behind those walls lay answers to questions that had haunted him for weeks. Why had certain files gone missing? Who was behind the mysterious leaks affecting national security? And most importantly, why did it seem like someone inside the bureau was working against the very people they were supposed to protect? Dan had always prided himself on his ability to think critically, to connect dots others missed. But this time, the puzzle felt impossibly complex. Every lead he followed led to a dead end. Every question raised more doubts than answers. Still, he pressed on, driven by a sense of duty and an unshakable belief that the truth mattered, no matter how uncomfortable or dangerous it might be. The confrontation with the security team outside the FBI headquarters was just the beginning. As the crowd dispersed and the guards finally allowed him to leave without further incident, Dan knew he couldn't give up. Instead, he decided to dig deeper, determined to find out what the FBI was hiding and why they were so desperate to keep him away. Back at his office, surrounded by stacks of papers, old case files, and notes scribbled in haste, Dan began piecing together the fragments of information he had gathered. There were whispers of internal investigations, leaked memos hinting at misconduct, and rumors of high-ranking officials involved in activities that violated both laws and ethics. Each clue brought him closer to the truth, but also put him in greater danger. As night fell, Dan sat alone under the dim light of his desk lamp, staring at a single piece of paper that had been slipped into his mailbox earlier that day. It contained only 3 words: "Trust no one." Who had sent it? And what did it mean? Was it a warning or a threat? Dan sighed, rubbing his temples as he leaned back in his chair. He had faced challenges before, but this felt different. This felt personal. Whatever secrets the FBI was guarding, they were willing to go to extreme lengths to protect them. And if Dan wanted to uncover the truth, he would need to tread carefully or risk becoming the next casualty in a game played by much bigger players. The days that followed were a blur of activity. Dan pored over every scrap of information he could find, chasing leads late into the night and barely sleeping. His apartment became a fortress of evidence, walls covered in sticky notes and timelines scribbled in red ink. But for every answer he found, two more questions arose. One evening, while reviewing surveillance footage from outside the FBI building, Dan noticed something strange. In the corner of the screen, partially obscured by a lamppost, was a figure, a man dressed in black, standing motionless as if waiting for someone. At first glance, it seemed insignificant, just another passerby caught on camera. But when Dan slowed down the footage, he saw the man pull out a phone and make a call right before the security team arrived to block him. Could this be a coincidence? Or was this man connected to the events that unfolded outside the FBI headquarters? Determined to learn more, Dan traced the number through his contacts, eventually discovering it belonged to an anonymous tip line used by whistleblowers within the bureau. The discovery sent a chill down his spine. Someone inside the FBI was trying to communicate, but why hadn't they come forward directly? What were they afraid of? As the pieces began to fall into place, Dan realized the scope of the conspiracy was far larger than he'd imagined. It wasn't just about missing files or leaked memos, it was about power, corruption, and betrayal at the highest levels. And now, he was dangerously close to exposing it. But danger came knocking sooner than expected. Late one night, as Dan worked at his desk, he heard a faint sound outside his door, soft footsteps, deliberate and slow. He froze, his heart pounding in his chest. Grabbing a flashlight, he crept toward the entrance, peering through the peephole. Nothing. Yet the feeling of being watched lingered, heavy and oppressive. When he checked the hallway later, he found a small device attached to his doorframe, a listening bug. Someone was monitoring him. Dan knew then that he was playing with fire. Whoever was behind this operation didn't want him digging any deeper, and they weren't afraid to use intimidation to stop him. But fear only fueled his determination. If anything, the discovery of the bug proved he was on to something big, something worth risking everything for. Over the next few days, Dan took extra precautions, moving locations frequently and encrypting all his communications. He reached out to trusted allies, including former colleagues and investigative journalists, sharing fragments of what he'd uncovered without revealing too much. Trust was a luxury he couldn't afford anymore. Meanwhile, the pressure mounted. Anonymous threats started appearing in his inbox, cryptic messages warning him to drop the investigation. One read, "You don't know who you're dealing with." Another simply said, "Stop while you still can." But stopping wasn't an option. Not now, not when he was so close to uncovering the truth. The weight of the investigation began to take its toll on Dan. Sleepless nights turned into blurred days, and the constant fear of being watched left him edgy and paranoid. Yet, amidst the chaos, there was one person who grounded him. His younger sister, Emily. A school teacher with a warm smile and a heart full of kindness, Emily had always been Dan's rock, even during his darkest moments. One evening, after another grueling day of research, Dan decided to visit her. He needed a break from the madness, if only for a few hours. As he walked into her cozy apartment, the smell of freshly baked cookies greeted him, offering a rare moment of comfort in an otherwise turbulent world. "Hey, big brother," Emily said, hugging him tightly. "You look like you could use some rest." Dan forced a laugh, trying to mask the exhaustion etched onto his face. "Just a little tired, that's all." But Emily wasn't fooled. She knew her brother better than anyone. Over dinner, she pressed him gently, asking about the stress lines creasing his forehead and the haunted look in his eyes. Reluctantly, Dan opened up, sharing bits and pieces of what he'd uncovered without revealing too much. He didn't want to worry her, or worse, drag her into the danger he faced. "I just can't let this go, Em," he admitted, his voice heavy with resolve. "If I stop now, whoever's behind this wins. And I can't live with that." Emily listened intently, her expression shifting from concern to admiration. "You've always stood up for what's right, Dan. That's why people respect you. But promise me you'll be careful. You're not alone in this fight." Her words resonated deeply with Dan. For the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of hope, not because the road ahead would be easy, but because he knew he wasn't fighting alone. The support of loved ones gave him strength, reminding him why he fought so hard for the truth. Back at his temporary safe house, Dan revisited the evidence, feeling renewed determination. He uncovered new leads, a series of financial transactions linking several high-ranking FBI officials to offshore accounts, payments made under suspicious circumstances. It was enough to suggest a pattern of corruption reaching deep into the Bureau's upper echelons. But as the puzzle came together, so did the risks. One night, while reviewing documents late into the hour, Dan received a call from an unknown number, hesitant but curious. He answered. "Mr. Bongino," a low, gravelly voice said. "You're getting closer than you should. Back off before it's too late." Dan's grip tightened on the phone. "Who are you? What do you have to hide?" There was a pause, then a chilling response. "Let's just say, you wouldn't believe me if I told you." The line went dead. Dan stared at the phone, his mind racing. Whoever this person was, they knew exactly how close he was to unraveling their secrets. And they were willing to do whatever it took to stop him. Despite the threat, Dan refused to back down. Instead, he doubled down, reaching out to a trusted journalist friend who specialized in investigative reporting. Together, they devised a plan to expose the conspiracy once and for all. But timing was crucial. If they acted too soon, they risked tipping off the wrong people. If they waited too long, the evidence might disappear forever. As the clock ticked closer to the moment of truth, Dan prepared himself for the ultimate showdown. He knew the path ahead would be fraught with peril, but he also knew one thing for certain: the truth would prevail, no matter the cost. The day of reckoning arrived faster than Dan expected. Armed with irrefutable evidence, bank records, leaked memos and surveillance footage, he met his journalist friend Sarah in a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. The air was thick with anticipation as they reviewed the final pieces of the puzzle. "This is it," Sarah whispered, her voice tinged with both excitement and fear. "If we publish this, there's no going back." Dan nodded, his jaw set firmly. "We don't have a choice. The public deserves to know the truth." Just as they were about to finalize their plan, Dan's phone buzzed. A single text message appeared on the screen. They know. His blood ran cold. How had they been discovered? Had someone betrayed them, or had the enemy been watching all along? Before he could process the implications, the cafe door burst open. Two men dressed in suits stormed inside, their eyes locked onto Dan. Without hesitation, Sarah grabbed the flash drive containing the evidence and slipped out through a side exit, disappearing into the crowd. "Stay calm," Dan told himself, trying to mask his panic. He stood up slowly, meeting the intruder's gaze. "Can I help you?" One of the men smirked, pulling out a badge. "Federal agents. You're coming with us." Dan's mind raced. Was this really the FBI? Or were these imposters sent to silence him? Either way, resisting would only escalate the situation. With a deep breath, he complied, allowing himself to be led outside to a waiting car. As the vehicle sped away, Dan couldn't shake the feeling that everything hinged on Sarah's success. If she managed to get the evidence to the press, the world would learn the truth. But if she failed, well, Dan didn't want to think about that possibility. Hours passed in tense silence. The agents refused to answer his questions, their faces expressionless masks. Finally, the car pulled up to an unmarked building, its windows dark and foreboding. As Dan stepped out, he noticed something strange, a faint light flickering in one of the upper floors. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, a man Dan recognized instantly. It was the same person who had called him earlier, warning him to back off. But now, the man wore a different expression, not menacing, but almost apologetic. "You've done well, Mr. Bongino," the man said, his tone surprisingly calm. "But the game is far from over. What you've uncovered so far is just the tip of the iceberg." Dan's heart sank. An even bigger conspiracy. Could that be possible? The man handed him a folder. its contents sealed tightly. Read this carefully, and remember, trust no one. Before Dan could respond, the man turned and disappeared into the night, leaving him alone with the mysterious package. As the car drove away, Dan opened the folder, his eyes scanning the first page. What he read made his blood run cold. Inside the folder was information that could change everything, not just about the FBI, but about the very foundations of power in the country. But with every revelation came new dangers. Who else was involved? And how far would they go to protect their secrets? Dan knew one thing for certain: this was only the beginning. The real battle for the truth was yet to come. Will Dan survive the next chapter of this deadly game? Will the truth finally see the light of day, or will those in power crush it before it can spread? Stay tuned for the next episode. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.